Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspiral podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in again. And today we're bringing back another guest that I interviewed literally about 100 episodes ago. I think it was episode 60 with Jonathan Hammond. And I'll put a link up for that too, so you can check that out because it was a really, really wonderful interview. I really enjoyed that one when I got to talk to Jonathan. And Jonathan is the author of the Shaman's Mind, Huna Wisdom to Change Your Life. And you can go back and check that out to get more of the bio. I'll put all the bio in the show notes, but I want to jump into this conversation because Jonathan has a really unique perspective that ties in sort of this shamanic elder healer sort of tradition of how do we view life from. And I think that that information is really pertinent to when we're talking about this concept of the illusion of free choice and the return to mastering your own life. Because as you go through your book, Jonathan, you definitely see that traditional elders like that view the lens that they look at life through is very different than the average person. And so I think as we go through the different parts of this interview today, we're going to touch on a lot of pieces that'll pull back to both of those concepts. So Jonathan, welcome back to the show.
Aloha. It's so good to be with both of you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Oh,
Aloha.
you're welcome. Aloha back. So Jonathan is in Hawaii right now, so which is awesome. One day we will make it out there, my friend, and we'll come and visit
I'll
you.
show you around. I love showing people around.
Sounds good.
Favorite thing to do. Good.
You know, I would love to start because I remember when I was reading your book the first time, just in even the intro, really some really profound stuff, I think, even just in the intro before you even get into all of the teachings. And I think maybe a good place to start would be you talk in the beginning about the massive planetary shift in consciousness that's currently taking place. And maybe to start off, we can start from your perspective as sort of what that's about and maybe even where are we currently from your perspective in that? Because the last time I talked to you was right at the beginning of big lockdowns with COVID and kind of where we are now. And that would be a good place to kind of kick this off.
Yeah, not to be too dramatic, but I think it's a kind of an apocalyptic revelation. That's what's happening right now, as has been prophesied by many of the indigenous cultures. And I think more than anything, it is what the invitation now, sociologically and personally, is a turn away from what the Native Americans called wetiko, that virus, that parasite of the mind that operates on the idea that we're separate. The Gnostics called it the demiurge, the false god of the binary, the false god of the conventional. And I think that that what's being revealed right now is about the choice, to use that word, to turn away from conventional mainstream ideas, rules, expectations about what we are and what we're expected to be, towards something more natural and more internal within us. And that that we have the biological wiring to find a different directionality for ourselves, but it can only be accessed through the turning away from the overculture into something that is more dropped into ourselves. And it is the same evolutionary life force that infuses nature. And so that we are wired to connect with our own individual evolutionary life force that, for my money, is the same evolutionary life force as we see in nature. Because if you think of the earth, it just keeps evolving, it keeps growing, it keeps creating itself. And we don't live on earth, we are earth. And that means that intelligence and that evolutionary force lives in us. But we're so socialized to pull away from it, to ideas about what men are, what women are, what society is, what money is, what politics are, all of those things, that we pull away from the very programming or the inner apparatus that we need to traverse these changing times, because it's in there. It's in there. And if we can all access it, we'll know how to traverse these times.
So moving from an outer authority to inner authority and one that is aligned with nature, is that what you're suggesting? Jonathan, can you speak a little bit more about wetiko? We even did a short clip on it during the last episode, but I would love it if the audience is not familiar, just so that they can kind of get an overview of what that means.
Yeah, what it means and how it plays out in our lives. Because,
How it influences
yeah,
us.
part of what I think is so important around these kind of conversations is it's like there's a shedding light on things that's really essential so that we can then re-see it and make new choices.
Yeah.
So maybe share a little bit, like Ted mentioned, what wetiko is and how
Yeah.
that's sort of playing out in people's lives that they might not even be aware of.
Yeah, it was identified as a kind of parasite or virus of the mind, of the human mind, that in a way we are all at least potential carriers of. There's even a Hawaiian word for it, eepa, which is translated as deceit that defies comprehension. So
Mm.
it is this part of the psyche that tunes into the illusion of separation, which is what's wrong with everything. If we could all know that we are simply individual apertures through which the one reveals itself, then we would stop our dominion over nature. We would stop being cruel to each other. We would stop hoarding wealth. We would stop every kind of ism that we don't like. Because essentially, Wetiko is about the forgetting that what we do individually has a direct and substantive effect on ourselves because we are part of the all. So another way to think of that kind of unity is that we're all individual waves in the ocean, but we can't separate ourselves from the ocean.
Mm.
And so the idea is so how we act and what we do has a direct effect on the collective. And this virus of the mind obscures that and brings us toward a kind of solipsistic existence, our own narcissism, our own. And the other thing about Wetiko is that it's characterized as self-cannibalizing, meaning
Mm.
that it is designed to kill the host. And the Native Americans, they were the ones who identified this. There's another correlation. The Gnostics talked about the demiurge, which is they called the false god of the binary. So the demiurge is, and the demiurge and the archons, the evil, the kind of evil agents that worship the demiurge. And so the Gnostics were very tuned into the actual teachings of Christ, which were about connectivity and love and all of those things. And they identified that armchair morality that was birthed with the organized religion movements about good, bad, black, white, amazing, terrible, which is all we see. All we see is the binary.
Mm.
And that is what is considered conventional now. And of course, with the binary is with the separate, is the idea that I'm other than you. And so the what's happening now on the planet is a waking up to the idea that we aren't separate, and that those binary polarities are no longer they've worn out their welcome. Even Jung in 1951, Carl Jung wrote, when he was going through his more mystic phase as opposed to his psychological phase, he wrote that in December 2020, he wrote this in 1951, a book called Ion, that in December 2020 we would end the Piscean age, which he characterized as an age that was a battle between good and evil, a battle that we would lose. And in December 2020, we would enter the Aquarian age, which he considered the next 2,000 years to be about individuation, meaning that the human would develop not against those different polarities, good, bad, black, white, but an internal truth and an integration of one's darkness and an acceptance of one's darkness and shadow and all of those things, so that we can get on with it, and so that we can see that that everything is gray, and that we're supposed to all exist in the gray together. And that the next 2,000 years, Jung said, would be a time when we do that. And so at the beginning of healing, and this as healers, at the beginning of any healing, all the darkness comes up, all the shadow material comes up, all the stuff that we wish wasn't there, but we now need to acknowledge in order to address it. And that's really what's going on the planet right now. And part of what's really being acknowledged more than anything else is that virus of the mind that believes in separation.
Yeah, I think that theme has come up several times with different people. And we talked about that a lot with Paul too, in a different way. And so whenever we see those
Mm.
correlations, I always think that's really, really important. And kind of like when we think about what's going on, first, it's like over the past 2 years, that degree of separation has been so amplified, I think, to make it so obvious how polarized we can be. And then I feel like there's a transition happening right at the moment that's allowing for some reconciliation to take place around that and to start to see it differently. Because you've seen polarizations, even polarizations in families. And now I'm seeing opportunities for families to kind of come back again together and sort of drop some of the ideologies that maybe they've held or some of these types of things. So it seems like in what Paul had said, we've experienced separation as far as we can go as a human
Yeah,
race. And
correct.
now if we kept on going, we would basically be destroying ourselves. So now is the pathway back.
And just to say this out loud, I think that polarization is by design. I think
Yeah.
part of the conventional overculture is one of an unconscious enslavement to it. You know, when you think of the idea of that, so many of us yearn for the paradise of childhood, what Jung called the paradise of childhood, that sense that we're really taken care of and we're really loved, and so many of us didn't get that, and so we were looking for a parent, and those at the tip top go, "I'll be your parent. I'll be your parent," and follow these rules, and they're all rules toward enslavement. So that polarization is by design. And what we're waking up from, what we need to wake up from, is that we're being duped into following someone else's rules that are meant to enslave. And that's the part that's so important. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so
I
glad you
love
mentioned
that you
that.
brought that up because that's a part of the heart of what this whole series is about. And even prior to this one was a series called Know Thyself. It was a
Right.
bringing questions to facilitate a shift and bringing people back from an outer authority to an inner authority. And when you talked about nature earlier on,
Yeah.
I feel like this is where sometimes people get confused with what do we even mean by nature? And I think it's because we've been so disconnected from it that we've lost what that even means. A lot of old traditions worked, medicine was built around nature, the elements of the planet, all these different things. So a lot of times I think, there's an aspect of getting into nature, like
Hmm.
maybe get out of technology all the time and get back to something natural. Like there's a different frequency that you're going to be immersed in when you're in nature that I think creates a resonance which allows you to connect more back to that true self. So when we talk about nature, what does that mean from your perspective from a shaman perspective, as far as physically in nature, but then even acting from like natural principles within ourselves?
Yeah. So if you think about what shamanism really is, more than anything, it is a reverence for nature. So Christians worship Christ, and Buddhists worship Buddha, and shamanic practitioners or earth-based practitioners, they worship nature. What we're worshiping and what we're seeing in nature is a template to teach us about ourselves. So if you leave the forest alone to do its thing, that forest will continue an endless process of continued growth, evolution. It doesn't deny itself what is good for it. It reaches towards the sun. It takes in the water. It roots itself into the earth, and it is everything in nature is of itself so, meaning that it is a spontaneous and unapologetic and non-self-conscious expression of what it is. And we are all individually that. That is us. We are not separate from nature. We are beings of nature. So when we talk about following our own nature, we're talking about that unapologetic, unself-conscious, of itself so-ness that is Jonathan and Jason and Taya. That we're following. We're following that, and the only way to get there is by turning away from the rules, someone else's rules, someone else's idea about what we're supposed to be, and because we're wired for it. So when we talk about the forest continuing that process of growth and evolution, there's an energy underneath that. And the energy underneath that, something moving towards growth and evolution, what would that energy be? What would that intentionality be? It can only be love, because it can only be something that wants to keep going, that wants to celebrate itself and understand itself more fully. And that's called love. And so that is surging within us. But with that comes the impoliteness of telling our own truth and living from our own truth and our own set of rules. And that is what, when we talk about coming back to nature, we're never going to go back to all living in tents and in cabins, and that's not it. But the rewilding of the psyche is back toward that, is back toward a sense of the only truth that's real is the one that feels right, or the one that doesn't feel right. Truth is a felt experience. This is just facts. And you find that below the waist. That's why when Jung spoke about libido, he wasn't talking about sexuality. He was talking about the life force that comes from the place from which we create.
Yeah.
And it's deep within us. And that's, the Hawaiians even have a word for the gut, which they call na'au, which is translated as the heart of the mind. It's also genitals and guts, intestines. And the idea is that's the true wisdom place for us. This one is just adhering to the culture.
Yeah.
That's really the difference. So does that help you understand the correlation?
That makes my heart sing, Jonathan. I really enjoy having this conversation with you and your candidness around it, because I think it's really important. I really do think that these are things people need to think about, because, getting back to a natural state of living, and you combine natural and you brought love into that too. And I really feel like the concept of love needs to be re-examined for people, because it's got sometimes this inherent, almost like it's okay, everybody kind of stay loving, and there's an aspect of that, but there's a ferocity that's inherent in love too, and there's boundaries around it, and there's a lot of pieces to it that can be ferocious as well. I mean, look at like a mama bear, right? There's got to be a ferocity in that comes from a place of love. So I love that you also, I mean, these are so many things that we've been really deep in ourselves for a while. And so I love hearing it kind of mirrored back from someone that we haven't talked to for a while. So, but around the spontaneousness and the non-apologetic unself consciousness, this is where the discomfort comes for people. Like this is also a really important part, I think, that is part of this conversation. We talk about free will, right? How much of the choices that we make do we make because they stay within that sort of comfort zone of what we become familiar with? When we start to do what Jonathan's talking about and really start to abide by what is naturally, what are those spontaneous instructions within ourselves that are surfacing at any given moment in time, and are we able to adhere to that? Or do we kind of re-rationalize it in the brain and then sort of dampen it back down again? I think this is stuff that naturally tends to come up when we start to do that. But the more that we do it, I feel like that natural wave can't be stopped after a while.
Yeah, the thing that's tricky is, Freud identified a part of the psyche. He identified three parts of the psyche, and one is called the superego. And the superego is the part of the psyche that is wired toward assimilation, that is wired toward toward convention, wired toward fitting in. Superego is great for things like not eating with your hands at a fancy restaurant and wearing black at a funeral and those sort of things. But we have relegated it to its supreme importance. So we're living in a culture that is mired with what everyone thinks, what everyone thinks of us. And we think that's what we're supposed to do. And with that comes being too good, which is a big problem in this culture. We think of people doing bad stuff, but when you're too good, you're actually turning against yourself sometimes. So we're wired toward that. So it's a tricky thing to come back to something that is that again is about the impolite bluntness of what is true for me, and being and having a rapport with that, and what you find is that when you can tune into that it gives everyone a sense of relief that they can do that for themselves. And it actually leads to a more shared experience rather than a kind of fanatic trying to fit into something that isn't necessarily your own. you know. So that's what I would say, is that we're really up against, psychologically, particularly in the Western psyche, we have an urge, a drive to assimilate, and it's keeping us from something just more authentic in ourselves.
Hmm.
I think when people second guess even what's coming up for them, maybe in the language that you're speaking of, they're unsure as to whether it's coming up due to the wetiko influence, or their own alignment with nature. How would you discern between what those two feel like, or feel how they feel different?
One feels evolutionary. One feels that there's a sense of growth in it. One contain, in the Hawaiian tradition, in the Huna tradition, love's perspective is always present in every choice that we make. That isn't necessarily airy fairy love, because, as Jason said, love can be ferocious. Love can be get away from me. Love can be I need to put up a boundary. Love can be I need to turn away from a family member. But what we look at is that perspective is always present. So when you think of the false voices in your head, those are the ones that are in some way, they don't offer anything. They don't offer any growth. They don't offer any possibility. They don't offer a sense that I can create further if I take this thought form and I hold it close to my heart, and I really alchemize it. You can, and it's not leading me anywhere other than fear, doubt, low self-esteem, stuck in my tracks. And so it's about listening. It's about really identifying that if the voice is not evolutionary, it's not a true voice. Not sometimes, always.
As
So,
you're even describing it, I think of I think maybe one is more contraction, tightening, as opposed to opening and feeling more expansive.
that's right. I often use this sort of analogy with clients. It's like, stay in the tension. So there's the old way, there's the old Jonathan, the old Jason, and then there's the new Jason that hasn't come on board yet. Stay in that tension. Fight with yourself. And then if you stay in that tension, the new Jason forms. And with that comes the paradigm shift, new rules, new ideas, and a different sense of limitlessness available on the other side of that. But you got to stay in that tension. It's when we lay down and we pull away from our own of course, resistance and healing, they go hand in hand, two sides of the same coin. And to stay in that until this new way forms. That's the invitation for everyone in terms of their own growth and healing.
That I'll sometimes, like when we're having conversations with different things, that remind me of concepts in osteopathy, and because I'm an osteopath too, and it's like how we often talk about working with fascial tension. You literally stay in the tension, and it's while you stay in the tension and be respectful and sort of dialoguing with the body in that tension, the tension gradually moves and unwinds and eventually comes to a new place, and a new sensation within the tissue itself. It's no longer the same, but the only way through it is to stay in the tension and allow it to kind of unravel.
And in the Hawaiian tradition, it's considered that all illness, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, is born of tension. And all health comes from a release of tension.
Yeah.
And that's certainly clear with your mind as well.
Yeah.
Because when you destabilize that default network in the brain that is constantly telling you what the rules of you are, and when you can destabilize that and see that for what it is, there's so much more on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, what are some tools that you offer to your students when you're working with clients, as far as what to do if they have trouble staying with that tension?
I think I would say, I don't know what the hell else you have better to do with yourself other than to stay in the tension. I think I would say that. That more than anything. I think that, it's important to, with the resistance toward healing, toward growth, you always have to tell the inner child the benefits. You have to be aware of the benefits, because you, even in giving up a bad habit, there are benefits in the bad habit. There are benefits in being stuck, always. And so you have to give this part of you the benefits of being unstuck. And if you don't know what they are, then you imagine them. And the imagination is the most powerful tool of I would say of the shamanic practitioner, but really of anyone, because when we are inspired to become something that we're not, it is only through the imagination that we can get there, because we're not there yet, you know. So it is about, what is it that you want, and become that now. Become that now. And if you can't, stay in the tension of whatever it is that's keeping you from becoming it. So I would say that, and also a really sober assessment of, what are you running through your system? What are you telling yourself? What rules are you following? What are those habitual beliefs and ways of being and ways of thinking of yourself that are just on autopilot, that you aren't even aware of, that have gone unexamined? And wake up to them. What's coming up on your screen of awareness? If you don't like it, what are you going to do about it? And there is something to do about it. And it's that work with oneself. It's called being awake. It's called living a spiritual life. It's called being creatively engaged with what's happening in oneself. You know, and as long as we stay in that, we're doing the thing that Carl Jung said would be the end of us, which is projecting our acknowledged stuff onto the world, onto everyone, you know. And so this is about, it's about, I need to clean up my mess enough that it doesn't spill over into someone else's experience. And that's all anyone has to do. But that comes through creative engagement with what's happening in you. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. A few different things come to mind when you're talking about that. Maybe first, let's talk about, because I think when we're talking about wrestling with all those things and coming out that other side, I mean, to me, that ties right into the concept of choices, because we're really choosing from very different places. And you talked about even like the different possibilities. And I know in the book, I think even say that attuning oneself to a magical spectrum of infinite possibilities, unseen truths, alternative realities, and spiritual support. So maybe to kind of give people a perspective of like, what is on the other side? You know, what is actually available to us when we start to make choices from this other aspect, as opposed to what's kind of been running our life through this place of wetiko for the most part.
Limit and lack.
What are the things that are possible?
Well, let me say this. The outward dream of each of our individual lives, whatever is in our life, whoever is in our life, whatever the circumstances, are a symbolic reflection of what's going on inside us. And so that means that if you want the divine in your life, if you want God in your life, then you create God right here. And what is your version of God right here? That you are infusing yourself with what you imagine God to be, which is infinite love. So self-love is not just a nice idea. It's not just a bumper sticker. It's not just a meme on Facebook. If you actually did it, it's the way in which you bring the divine to you. You become in sympathetic vibration with the divine. And so the divine is not something that just smiles on the lucky few. The divine comes and works in your life based on an inner world that is in alignment with it, or working toward being in alignment with it. And so with that then comes, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but choice from the kupua, from the Hawaiian shamanic tradition, is considered a magical power.
That's a beautiful way to actually think about it.
That's right. And so that means that the choice, so I'm seeing what my life is, and I'm seeing that is only an outward reflection of what lives in me. So if I change my inward dream, my outward dream changes. So in Hawaii, they think of old Hawaii, not the Hawaiians that are on the cell phones now, but the old Hawaii. The day is considered to start at nighttime. And it's in the nighttime, the inward, the darkness, the unseen dream that manifest existence of daylight emerges. So our inner dream is one that how we curate it, how we choose to think of it, how what beliefs we choose to finance and give clout to, how we think to take care of ourselves, what we're putting in our mouths. All of those things are in some way building what your external world can become, and that can be anything based on how you take care of yourself and how you self-invest in your inward dream.
I think that's so beautiful, and what you're speaking of is such a timely message, because I think of, you know, all the stuff that we've been hearing around the Great Reset and Agenda 2030 and so on. I feel like even beyond that agenda, there's this bigger agenda, much higher power at play here, which is maybe allowing all these other smaller agendas to move through in order to create a catalyst for where it is that humanity can truly move into, that would be of benevolence and union and peace, and prosperity for everyone. I think of even, you know, the quarantine that so many of us have been in for the past 2.5 years. And what you're speaking of is like nighttime going within and reflecting and reevaluating. It almost seems like a metaphor for those teachings.
Yes, and I think that that this was a real opportunity for everyone to do that, even though it was a pain, and even though it was scary, and even though and it shook things up. It was a real opportunity. I think if you were someone who thought, okay, there's a pandemic, and when it's over, my life as I know it will continue, and I'm just waiting for it to be over. I think those people this summer, within the last 3 months, are now faced with the opportunity that was missed by not going inward and not looking at what's actually happening within me. I think of COVID as a kind of evolutionary spirit. Now, that's not a very popular thing to say, but that's how that's sort of just how it, and having had COVID and journeying with it, that was my experience with it. Is I felt like I was being made over. On some level, and I got it literally day after shutdown in March 2020, and had it for a month, and it was so helpful because it helped me understand what it was. And even if it does come from bats, you know, the shamanic shamanic meaning of bats are about death and rebirth. That's what they represent. And so literal death, and also the death of things that are no longer useful or relevant, and then the rebirth towards the new things. And I feel like that's very much what's happening on the planet right now. And I think COVID is a kind of metaphor for that. The other thing to say is that with this conventional overculture, you know, this polarized binary overculture, comes at this time on the planet the emergence of the non-binary, and the non-binary person who says, by virtue of what I am, I don't fit with you people, and you have to deal with me. And that is, and it's not that everyone is that, but those beings are here for an evolutionary purpose. They are here to usher in something that is different than this polarized thing that we've been doing since we've started civilization 6,000 years ago. You know, and there's this other thing that's really emerging now. And even Jung, clearly I'm a Jung fan, but you know, even Jung in his identification of anima and animus, you know, that was the masculine and feminine within all of us. You know, that he was pointing towards something. And I think that the new human, the new man, the new woman is more about a merging of those energies, a merging of the split between us individually. And if we do that individually, that has an effect on the way the collective separates.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe you can tie in when they talk about the fifth Pachacudi that I think it was the Quechua people in the South Andes talked about, because that's kind of in alignment with that sort of this idea that the we've kind of been in a more predominant sort of masculine energy, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit more,
Yeah.
and we're moving more. And I remember reading about this a long time ago when they were talking about the transition that was going to take place from the Piscean to the Aquarian age,
Yeah.
and that there was, how they described it at the time was that there was a movement from more of a solar plexus chakra dominance to more of a heart chakra dominance. But it's not that you're losing this, but you're balancing these out together. And so this is where I think there's blending. But maybe you can share that story a little bit for people that aren't familiar with it.
Yeah. So Apachacuti, so this comes from the Quechua people of the high Andes, and Apachacuti is a 500-year interval. And they and the Quechua people, it's shaman time, so you have to kind of be a little fudge a little bit what exactly they mean. But they talk about this being the fifth Pachacuti, and this is a time when the eagle, which from their perspective is considered a bird that is about masculine energy, directive, logic, informational, that at during the fifth Pachacuti, the condor, which is considered environmental, feminine, intuitive, that the previous Pachacutis have been dominated by the eagle, and that now the eagle and the condor would fly together in the same sky, that they would merge together, and that was the invitation during this time on the planet. So that's one of the prophecies. But there are so many that are about this time. The rainbow prophecy of the Cherokee and the Iroquois, which is about people from with all different ethnicities. The rainbow is literally skin color, all coming together to usher in the light. There's the Kali Yuga in the Hindu tradition. There's so many, but it does seem to be and what I love about the prophecies too is that they do talk about it's going to be tough, but they don't talk about that it's going to be the end. Mm. And I don't think that it is. I don't think that's where we're going. I think it's just what's happening right now is forced change, and with forced change comes resistance and the need for a lot of healers, because that's what you do when you're in the midst of a forced change in your life, is you go see a healer. And so I think that the age of the person who is wired toward helping the collective, which is what I think light workers are on the planet, whether or not you're a professional one or not, are really needed at this time on the planet, because they're the ones that are going to usher in this new way of being, in the midst of this really forced change.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I'm curious about is, like, even when you were talking about with the non-binary, and it's like aspects of that make complete sense to me, especially when I think about these stories that have come up from before and around what you had just mentioned. What I often seem like goes on at times is I feel like there's always this blending, maybe not always, but a lot of the time I feel like there's this blending of stuff that comes from like a place of really profound truth. Mm-hmm. And purity. Mm-hmm. And then there's also this aspect that feels like it tries to use some of that, but it more has a feeling of manipulation that doesn't come from the same place. And I mean, to me, I feel like this is all the time. And I've seen this in like healthcare forever. But it's like, it's almost like it's not wrong, but doesn't have the same purity attached to it. And you feel like it's being almost manipulated or used in a way for I don't even know what, but it just feels like it's whether for personal gain or something along those lines. And that happens and I've seen like across the board on almost everything, whether it's education, whether it's finance, whether it's medicine. You see parts of something that sounds true and has this really nice feeling attached to it, but it's kind of being used in a way that's not quite so pure anymore.
It's distorted.
It gets distorted.
Yeah.
And I find that still, even with what's I think going on now with this sort of blending of stuff, there's parts of it that feel so real. And I know different people that are going through things, and it feels like almost like sometimes like a physical manifestation of what I think is this union of things. And then there's other parts where I feel like it kind of gets manipulated and distorted. How do you discern the difference between those things for people? Because I think it can be a tricky place to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, I often talk about the Instagram healers. They take the weekend workshop and then they and I think that the culture is such that at 19, 20 years old, We have a device where we are supposed to put the product of us on that's supposed to live forever and be what we are. And so there's very little sense of a tolerance for the process of actually becoming a wisdom keeper. And the process of becoming a wisdom keeper is about where in my life am I not walking my talk? And the reason why those things feel plastic or phony, despite the fact that they've read the books and they have enough of the wisdom to impart it, is that on some level, something is being compartmentalized. When you think of living a spiritual life is about the confrontation of the compartmentalization that keeps you from living a spiritual life. That's what it is. And if you're not doing that, it rings hollow. That said, from where I sit, they have their purpose because they get people in the door. And if a half-baked healer gets someone in the door, gets them thinking about that they have choices and that there are other possibilities available to them, even the possibilities that there's things going on the planet that you should tune into, I say God bless them. But you can feel authenticity. You can feel authenticity with the message. And more than anything else, it really is about that. It's also about to go back to the superego, when the superego, what does everyone think of me, is involved in healing, in imparting spiritual wisdom. And those things do not go together. So with my clients, I don't care if they like me, because I may have to tell them something that they may not like. So that can't even be on the table for me. And I certainly can't care what they think of me, because I have to remain true to the messages that I'm getting, And so I think that when you connect with the overculture that is so mired in what everyone thinks, and status and money and all those things, and you try to merge that with true spiritual teachings, they don't mix, and that's why they feel hollow. Mm-hmm. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, and I think it ultimately, all of it comes up for us to continually within ourselves keep trying to know what truth is and what sort of more falsehood is. And it's a path that I think we just as we keep navigating it, we get a better sense in ourselves of what resonates, what doesn't, and we spend less time engaging in things that don't, if we're learning from them. So,
and the purpose of elders is really about everyone needs someone to answer to. Everyone needs someone to answer to. Everyone has their compartmentalized stuff. Everyone has their stuff that they don't see. I have a full-time practice, and every week for 20 years, I see someone who knows my clients by name at this point, and we talk through their stuff, and we talk through what it's bringing up in me, and we talk through how do I keep myself clean in this. And whether or not you're a professional healer or not doesn't matter. We need to have someone to answer to. Mm-hmm. I'll even say this, we need our own version of confession. Mm. We need that.
Yeah, we wholeheartedly agree with that as well. I feel like even with us, we have mentors too that we study at different times with and work with one-on-one as well, just to kind of check in, because sometimes it's hard sometimes you miss things that different aspects of self, or there's shadows that come up,
or the chinks in your armor that you just can't see.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. It's so important. It's so important. And what's wrong, capital W wrong, on the planet is the absence of that process with everyone individually. That's what's wrong. That's what's wrong. It's that which has not been examined in oneself, the psyche is always moving towards homeostasis, which means that when we project, when we splay out our shit onto another, what the psyche is doing is trying to get us to see that thing in us that we're not acknowledging. So that's why that's there. So projection is a helpful psychological mechanism if you take the message and if you wake up to it and if you examine why that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you agree that emotions have a similar place as well? Like they can be helpful in that sense as well? Or what's your take on that?
Well, emotions are directional. right? When you think of, you don't decide to be angry, it just starts happening. You don't decide to start crying, it you start crying. You don't decide to start feeling horny, you just feel horny. So it's connected, but that part of us is connected to nature. So anything that is spontaneous, to go back to that word at the beginning of our conversation, spontaneous and unapologetic, is truth trying to reveal itself to you. And our job is to get the conscious mind to listen to it. It doesn't mean always act on it. We're not always going to follow our horniness or our rage or whatever. But the acknowledgement of that is our opportunity to do something skillful and creative with it, because it's directional. Even something as unattractive as jealousy is really saying, I want what that guy has. That's directional. That's evolutionary. And if you use it as such, those darker colors of us are things that help us grow. And to liken it to nature, if you think of the things in nature that we don't like, the tarantulas and the great white sharks and the whatever, those things, we don't think they're not supposed to be there. We don't like them, but we don't think they're not supposed to be there. And to treat ourselves as a being of nature, it's the same with us. And those beings in nature that we don't like serve a purpose. They are part of the interdependence of nature, and they're needed, which means that all of our stuff is needed. If we can acknowledge it as such and work with it and turn it into something creative and evolutionary for ourselves.
Yeah, and it comes back to, like you had mentioned, that with when we recognize if there's something we want in from our neighbors or something along these lines, it's also being able to be non-judgmental of yourself and be honest and authentic, that's kind of where we are. Otherwise, the alternative is that we're really just denying what we are, never really giving us the chance to actually start to progress from that too. Because there's often so much guilt and shame attached to the thoughts of what has been deemed to be the correct behavior or what's sinful or all of these different things. And that's created so much. It causes so many people to kind of shut down before they give themselves a chance to actually work with what's inherently coming up.
Yeah, well, and the antithesis of love is criticism and judgment. If you want to block love, bring in criticism and judgment. That's what that is, And again, criticism and judgment, and particularly judgment, is part of the overculture's enslavement that came with the armchair morality of good, bad, black, white, sin, not sin, etc. And so when we are judging ourselves or criticizing, that's wetiko. That's at least the seeds of it. That's the seeds of leaving ourselves and merging with the overculture. Now it doesn't mean we don't assess. It doesn't mean we don't take in feedback that feels helpful and growthful to us. But when it's just about but criticism and judgment separate, and love conjoins. And if we're moving towards conjoinment and away from separation, then criticism and judgment are really in the way of that happening.
From your perspective, Jonathan, what is the overculture, and when did that even start? It's almost like, where was the birth of wetiko in the first place?
And then you're gonna have to start bashing Christians. I think when we moved away from a kind of hunter-gatherer culture into something that was about bigger systems and a sense of a separation from nature, a dominion over nature, a dominion over or a suppression of the feminine. The age of ideas was wonderful, but sometimes the ideas took us away from felt truth. So I think it's been going on for about 6,000 years. I think since we talk when you talk about civilization, the beginning of civilization, that was really the end of organic truth. That was the process of ending that. And it certainly shows up in in the polarities that exist in organized religion. Now, I think all those religions, all the Abrahamic religions, at their core, are getting at one spirit. I think that they are getting at universal love, but they're so corrupted and they're so used for something else. And then they became a way in which a kind of model for the way corporations do the same thing. You know, and even family structures, and even the idea of you know what I'm talking about in terms of evolutionary energy inside us. It's below the waist. And what did those systems do? They said, we don't want you below the waist. We want you anywhere but below the waist. And below the waist is dark and dirty and bad, you know. And yet that is the place where we actually find ourselves. They don't want us to find ourselves because they want us enslaved, you know. So that's my take on sort of. But I think it's been going on for 6,000 years. I think it got really bad about 2,000 years ago, and continues to be. And I think it's just right now it's just worn out its welcome. And it's so interesting to me because it has worn out its welcome that we're now legislating against vaginas in 2020. I mean, I just can't even believe it. But I can, given the pushback from those people at the top who are threatened by everyone getting inside themselves, you know. And the fascinating thing, I'm now a psychedelic facilitator. The fascinating thing too is that anyone who does any therapeutic work with psychedelics or plant medicine see this matrix thing for what it is. And 70 years ago they put the kibosh on that. You know? But it's still there, and that truth is still there for us to take on for ourselves, and to not only fight against it, but it's not even fight against it as much as it's go to the side of it and do your own thing, and let that thing be what it is, and find your own way. You can still find your own truth even in this polarized world. And I think that's the invitation right now.
Yeah, and it's just running all of that information through your own sense of self. You know, even with having a mentor, you know, it's like I think it's important to keep running through until eventually I think we all eventually arrive at being our own mentor, because we're so connected to something that's ultimately more real. You know, I remember Dr. David Hawkins, who I studied with a lot before, he would talk about as soon as you added ism to the end of any word, it dropped below the level that was basically supportive of health at the level of 200. Either got down into pride or all these other sorts of things that were inherently kind of more destructive. And so, you know, you could look at a lot of religions. Doesn't mean that a lot of times the original teachings were very high level of consciousness, but the ism, when it got attached to it, turned it into something very different. And I think, like you're saying, like just it ties into more of the, you know, the
Power.
the power and the control, and those things tend to be what usually surface at some point.
Yeah, and any feedback that doesn't give you more authority isn't good feedback, you know. And certainly you would always listen to advice from loved mentors, but defer to your own authority. And the ultimate goal, yes, is that because there's only one mind and we're all connected to it, the idea that we can let the chi teach us. We get to the point where we let the chi teach us, you know, and that we read the books and we have a lexicon of knowledge and all of that. But at the end of the day, there's something else. We get to a point where that is guiding us, and that's part of it too. But when you think of the nature of power, is that we all have all of it. Each of us have all of it, and so power over is just going to lead to retaliation and fear. Power against is just going to cause tension. But the power to empower another, to give someone more of their own authority, that's how you know you have it, because you can give it away.
Nicely put. I think, do you have a question first?
I was just going to ask, since you brought it up, as far as psychedelics, are you talking about like ayahuasca, mushrooms? What are you speaking of? And I wanted to ask for your insights as well, since you have experience with it. Is it beneficial for everyone across the board, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, I had my ayahuasca thing years ago. My recent training has been in working with psilocybin. So the answer to your question is that no, it's not good for everyone, and I even think people that it is good for need to go through a process to prepare for it. Yeah, so the idea And again, this is part of the conventionality of the overculture, that you go and you take the ayahuasca and you're fixed, and you've heard the whole thing. It's 10 years of therapy. Yeah, it's 10 years of therapy, but you've done 10 years, and so now it all integrates. So it's certainly not for everyone. It's certainly not for everyone. And of course, there are psychological disorders that might be contraindicated or that kind of thing. But I think that it's about how I have found psychedelics to be useful is when you're working on the thing, when you're in the, and it's just not, and and you've looked at it from all sides, and you have really and you've really worked on it, and you're almost there. The psychedelics can help destabilize that default network in the brain enough that this new something suggestible, you become a little bit more suggestible, and this thing takes hold. That's when I found it to be really helpful for myself and for people. Is really when it's about like it just needs that little push, but you've been working on it and looking at it from all sides. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Then they come out and they're like, "Oh shit, I've been in the Matrix all this time. What do I do now?"
That's right. That's the other thing is that if you haven't been doing work on yourself, a lot of time it can be overwhelming. It can be really scary. It can be a great opener. It can be a great opener to, okay, that spirit thing that's really real. I thought it was real, but it really is real, and I see it now. But it can really backfire. I mean, there's something called a healing crisis, and that is really when you're confronted with, this is the thing, and my fingerprints are all over this, and and that's a very scary thing to face. So it's important that it be really done mindfully.
Mindfully and with a person that can facilitate and hold a specific space and do it properly. And I mean, we were in Mexico for a while, and it's like, that's a big thing that goes out in like Tulum area and stuff. And it's like, there's a lot of times where I hear some of the stories, and it's like, there's so many more layers to it when you're really wanting to work with it, to do it in a really effective way. Otherwise, I think for some people it can be dangerous. But yeah, you get the right facilitator in the right space, and it's a very different thing.
Yeah, there's ethical considerations. They talk about set and setting. I mean, there's so much to holding up an appropriate container for that work.
Jonathan, one other thing as we're winding down here, that you had mentioned in your book, because I think this is a really important one for people at this time too, even with the ability to discern when we're coming from a place of nature versus when we're coming from a place of wetiko, the idea of communication and dialoguing with the body. A lot of times I think people have just become so disconnected to the body, and a part of that process is trying to reconnect and learn to trust it again. How do you work with that? Where can people sort of start that process? And the importance of it from your perspective.
Yeah, well, in terms of anything physical, in terms of any physical illness or disease of some sort, you can think of it as it's that the body is trying to solve a problem that the conscious mind has not solved. And more than anything else, that problem is about attention. That problem is that we're not paying attention to something. And so when these things come up, when the aches, the pains, the inflammation in your hips, whatever, that those things are there. Those things are there to help you start to pay attention to something. And so one of the shamanic processes is that you go into a kind of journey space, you give that part of your body a mouth, the ability to communicate, and you let it talk. But the idea, I've seen so many physical things vanish simply with paying attention to it. I cannot tell you how much, and even a lot of the autoimmune stuff, is about that I'm not fully in myself enough. I've left myself. I've left my experience. I'm only paying attention to you. This makes no sense medically, but the Lyme tick is attracted to selfless love. and it wants to taste and bite into that which that person who is so selfless. That's what it's attracted to. And so that kind of selflessness, that's a lot of times when you're out of yourself, you got a hole, and the hole needs to be filled, and it gets filled with illness.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, and it's so funny even the way you mentioned that. I literally a little while ago did almost that exact same process where, I was sitting in the bath after I had like a flared up left hip pain that came up after seeing a loved one, and out of the blue, and
Yeah.
literally no physical reason for it, and I sat there and I just, you kind of get into a bit of like a meditative state and slow everything down. And then I just went in and asked the hip what was going on and gave it space and in knowing that it had a voice and that it was going to share. And what it shared with me was profound. And it literally went from, I could barely move. It came on such intensity, to like literally gone. Woke up the next morning, was like disappeared, like it wasn't even really there. I mean, it's astounding. I find when you hit the root of certain things like that. I mean, that's the template, the blueprint for the physical body. So that stuff just filters down and corrects then the physicality from it. We've talked to Dr. Todd Overculture many times, and he does an area called mind-body logic or biological decoding, and basically looks at that for every illness that somebody deals with, there is an unresolved conflict that needs to be addressed. And when that conflict is addressed, literally like magic, it can disappear. And still to this day, I would say the most profound, quote unquote, spontaneous healings occur in that realm.
Yeah. Even if you think that this part of my body is dreaming a dream, and just like in a sleeping dream, everything that happens in the dream is a reflection of something about you, you can tune into the dream of this part of your body and let it speak to you, even if it speaks to you in symbol, and then interpret the symbol. And however you interpret it can't not be it, because we're in a non-separate universe. And so whatever your interpretation of that is that. And then you enter into reality where you can address it in a different way, and find out how it's connected to beliefs that have been on autopilot about something completely unrelated, having to do with your schedule, having to do with your fear about money and overwork, having to do with et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jonathan, what are some practical exercises that you can possibly offer to people to begin to open up more to possibilities or to a return to mastering their own life? Like, what are some simple things that they can do right now, starting today, that would allow them to open up?
Some nice actionables for people.
Sure, actionable. Sure, that's good. So here are a couple. You take a moment, write down all your negative core beliefs. Just write them down. Let it come. I'm ugly. I'm fat. I'm stupid. I'm never gonna get. Whatever those things are. You have them down. That's what you're up against. That's what you learned. That's the misknowledge. That's the mistakes that have obscured your original divinity. That's what they are. And then you rewrite them in their opposite and positive aspect, even if you can't believe it. You rewrite each one in there. So I'm ugly because I'm beautiful, and I'm stupid because I'm exactly as smart as I'm supposed to be, et cetera, et cetera. You rewrite them in there, and then you read them over, and then you paste them all over. And then when the old one comes up, you go, I'm not doing that one anymore. I'm doing this, and you start, and you just start to consciously change the beliefs and take the imaginative leap that this might be your reality, that your new beliefs might be a reality. So that's the first thing. Second thing is make a list of the things that you want. And I know this sounds egotistical or selfish, but most of us are so pulled away from what it is that we want. So make a list of those things, and then begin to read about them, begin to research them, post a little picture, get a Google image, post it on your desktop. So every time you turn it on, you see, and like these are all ways, because energy flows with our attention. Energy flows with our focus. So whatever we're placing our focus and attention on invites in the creative energies of the universe to bring to us the nearest physical equivalent of what we're placing our focus and attention on. But it's about the discipline, and that word is so loaded, but it's about the discipline of, I'm choosing these beliefs. I'm choosing to focus on this. Focus on what you want and not what you don't want. Give attention to what it is that you want and not what you don't want. How about this one? Expect the best. Expect the best. There is that's a whole mindset. That's a whole discipline in and of itself to do that. It just enters you into a different polarity, a different not polarity, a different paradigm, a different energy frequency. You know, where I'm looking for the possibility, not the roadblock. And when the roadblock comes, oh, it's just not my door.
Mm. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's like, I think the key word you said there too was imagination. You know, it's like, it's something that I think in many ways gets bred out of people as sort of more childish, but it really is probably one of the greatest superpowers. I really do think that what we are capable of imagining is directly going to be related to how big or small we make our life. It's such a powerful skill to play with and have fun with. Not like sit down to create tons of structure around it, but in a really fun, playful way. Just start imagining, because it's like when you really get into it, it becomes real and you feel it. And then I think that's where all the magic really starts to take place.
You know, I often give this example when I'm doing energy healing. So I'm doing Reiki on someone. And so I imagine that there's sort of a sphere of light and it's coming into the crown of my head and it's splitting off of my heart and it's going down my hands. So that's sort of how I picture it. So is Reiki real, or did I create the circumstances and the reality where I enter into Reiki happening? But either way, Reiki happens. And so it is about, and so imagination is key, because imagination takes you into a reality where certain things are possible that they aren't if you're not in that imagined reality.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I know when we do osteopathy, it's very, I mean, you're picturing with your hands lightly on someone, but you're in actually making adjustments on their viscera or their organ. I mean, you're not actually, but you are in a certain reality, in a certain dimension, I think. So, and you see change happen. You can't always explain it. You can't maybe always do a double-blind placebo-controlled trial around all of that stuff, but it's anybody that practices clinically experiences these things, and it's experiential.
It's experiential, and it's I don't think a lot of clinical work allows for, because what we're talking about is not really measurable. What we're
Right.
talking about is a felt sense that something is happening here, that my influence on this patient or this client is having an effect that I can't understand, but I know that is happening. You know, a lot of times when I'm doing supervision with my mentor and I'm talking about my clients, then I have the client, and whatever we talked about in supervision has already come online in the session 4 days later. You know, because energy is really that connected, and the intentionality and the focus that I'm giving the person on some level by energetic inference influences them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Jonathan, where can people learn more about the work you're doing? Anything else that you've got going? How they can set up appointments with you? Any of that kind of stuff? Where can we send them?
Yeah, mindbodyspiritmaui.com, or if you just Google Jonathan Hammond, I'll probably come up. And there's some classes on there, there's some trainings on there. I'm something I can't talk about yet, but there's some more online offerings that are coming up. But if you're on there, you'll get on my mailing list, and you'll be sent stuff. And if you want to do private work with me, that's where you find me too.
Wonderful. We will put all those in the show notes so people can check that out. Jonathan, that was really, really fun. Great chatting with you again.
It's so great to be here. I'm big fans of you too. I really am. I've been following for a long time.
Blessings to you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jonathan.
You're welcome. Aloha.
I think that